Electoral commissions from across the Commonwealth met in Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago for the 4th Commonwealth Electoral Biennial Conference 2016. The Commonwealth Electoral Network aims to promote good practices in the field of elections management, to facilitate experience sharing, and to foster a sense of community among Commonwealth election management bodies. Incoming chair of the conference, Mr. Mark Ramkerising, chairman of the Elections and Boundaries Commission of Trinidad and Tobago, examines the theme of this conference.
The theme of the conference is advancing good principles and electoral practices, and that is of importance to all citizens, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but throughout the Commonwealth, and I dare say throughout the world. At the end of the day, the elections really reflect the most basic need of society, expressing the sovereign will of the people. And anything that goes towards improving that process and leading to greater credibility is, I think, of great importance to the citizens of any country.
Deputy Commonwealth Secretary Political, Dr. Josephine Ogiambo, admits that democracy and the institutions and processes that support it is a work of constant evolution.
Lifting the quality and strengthening the relevance of our election management bodies is a continuing work in progress. All must strive to learn and apply the lessons from each new election and rise to the emergence of new challenges, as well as greater demands for transparency and integrity. This meeting is an opportunity to make a practical contribution to the very essence of what it is to live in a Commonwealth community. By learning and lifting the quality of what we do in the electoral sphere, the tide of democracy rises for all Commonwealth citizens. Our Commonwealth way is not about one size fits all. We build at the national level on the values and principles we share at the global level. This is what Commonwealth meetings such as this are about: to strengthen networks, to exchange, and to be mutually supportive.
Outgoing chair of the Commonwealth Electoral Network and chairperson of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission of Kenya, Mr. Ahmed Isaac Hassan, spoke of the relevance of other stakeholders.
I think Charles de Gaulle said a war is too important to be left to the generals alone. And so elections are too important to be left to the election bodies alone. And I posit that other stakeholders also are equally important in getting a free and fair elections. To conduct an election that meets the international standards, all electoral stakeholders have to individually and jointly play their role. EMBs are not the only one who should do this.
Discussions included ensuring equal access for all voters during elections, maintaining the independence of electoral commissions, regulating election campaign finance, managing the power of incumbent governments, and the use of new technologies in elections, including social media.
Universality of the franchise. That's something that should animate all our decisions, all our initiatives, to ensure that the franchise remains universal and that everyone has an opportunity to cast a ballot.
If we go back to the question of independence of electoral management bodies, one of the things they've looked at, and that will be part of the Commonwealth Good Practices Guide, will be how do you I would say implement the question of independence of these bodies. So we look at the statutory protection, that is having something in the Constitution, the laws protecting it, but also very importantly whether the question of independence includes the election management body having control over its own financing, over its own staffing. So these are issues that will directly come out of this conference and that can influence what we do in Trinidad and Tobago.
the Commission and the political parties have conceptually agreed that for political finance reform here in Trinidad, what is required is the implementation of a new political finance regulatory regime. And we feel together that 5 key components are necessary for this regime's success. The first is registration of political parties, then reporting and publication of information, limits on election expenses and contributions, the introduction of public funding, and finally compliance and enforcement mechanisms.
I think we benefit because what comes out of this conference influences what we do going forward. So, for example, one of the topics in this conference is campaign finance reform. We will be hearing from the experience of other electoral bodies as to how this has been handled, what has their experience been. I think these are the things we need in terms of going forward on that. It gives us ideas for drafting of our legislation. And that is just one topic. We've looked at voter registration, use of new media, the question of independence of electoral bodies. So these are all things which will redound to our benefit.
Dr. Robert Stephen Suraj Bali, Chairman of the Guyana Elections Commission, posed the question to Mr. Orek Fisher, Jamaican Director of Elections, as to what steps were taken by the Electoral Commission of Jamaica for their parliament to pass legislation that governs campaign financing.
What did you do to get that so far, to get these people who know it's going to be disadvantageous to them to pass that? Because that's where we stumble. That's where we have stumbled. And if I could, I don't know how you did it. If you can tell us, please do.
Well, the important thing is to ensure that the public has a buy-in. And then that is also, that provides some amount of pressure on the politicians. But more importantly, we dialogue with private sector organizations, the people who are donating, and for them to understand. And therefore, they declare that they would be willing to indicate to which party they were donating. So the input of the private sector, the people who are donating the funds, their buy-in is even more important than the political representatives, because if they agree that, that it should be in place, and they would not be prepared to continue to donate unless the legislation is in place, then that is a very, very important step in ensuring that it is done. So the buy-in of the public in general, the pressure groups who will apply the pressure, as well as the private sector organizations who provide the funds.
There's that workshop on new media in elections, and essentially what they're looking at, there are different issues. So, for example, the issue is that new media is sometimes used to inflame passions at election time by giving wrong information, false information. The question is, how do you regulate it? Can you regulate it? There is also the issue of campaigning, and it's an issue which has happened in Trinidad and Tobago, campaigning on election day by use of new media. Should it be regulated at all? These are the questions which have been considered.
In his presentation, Mr. Craig Jennis, Director of the Electoral Assistance Division in the Department of Political Affairs with the United Nations Secretariat, makes the point that one size does not fit all when it comes to election standards among the varying sovereign states.
As you all know far better than I, the challenge is often not to identify applicable norms and principles. The hard part is the application. First, there are many models of democracy and election administration. Each country must choose what fits it best. Best practice means best practice in the unique situation of each country. Paper-based voter registration may be right for one country, 10-finger biometrics for another. Both may be best practices, depending on the circumstances. Neither is intrinsically better. Electoral standards are targets, not benchmarks. No country, whether they are high income or low income, runs flawless elections. Elections are human endeavors and thus subject to inevitable human error. Electoral contestants have the right to expect honesty, fairness, transparency, consultation, But if they expect perfection, they will be disappointed.
The EBC remains a critical component in a free and fair election, and with continued partnerships within the Commonwealth Electoral Network, we continue to strengthen our capacity in conducting elections. The Elections and Boundaries Commission of Trinidad and Tobago, partners in democracy.